if I wanna leave a tip, I will, and more often than not, I leave something, not 20%, but I'll round up at the very least. But I would hate it if Italy became as transactional as the United States has become and is increasingly becoming.
Arrivederci. Ah, ok. Bravo, sai che non me lo ricordo. Prosecco. No, non ce l'ho. C'ho crema.
I'm Wendy Holloway, and this is Flavor of Italy, sharing the very best of Italian food and wine, lifestyle, and culture. This is Wendy Holloway with Flavor of Italy, and I'm here with Eric Lyman. He has the Substack Italian Dispatched. He's a Rome-based freelance writer and journalist and long-term expat. Laura Itzkowitz, and she's the New Roman Times. They both write amazing things on Substack and elsewhere. And Laura is also a Rome-based journalist who covers travel, arts and leisure, lifestyle, design, food and wine, and writes for a lot of well-known publications that we know and love, Travel and Leisure, Architectural Digest, and so forth. I'm a podcaster and have a Substack at Flavor of Italy. We're talking about tipping in Italy today, and both Laura and Eric have written articles about tipping in Italy and their vision on what you should be tipping. I just to throw my thoughts in before we get rolling, I live out in the country. I can see St. Peter's Dome from my property. I've been here over 40 years and I'm American, but I feel so much more Italian. I think my view on tipping and lifestyle and just the way we live in every sense of the word might be different. I hate to use the word real Italy, but when you get out of cities and very high-end restaurants, like the restaurant, Laura, that your husband works in, and Eric, where you reference in your article about tipping, but when you get into like local places, tipping is close to zero. Now, I watched my husband today when we had our coffee and our cornetti and everything, and he put down 10 cents. And it seems just fine to everyone in Italy. And his philosophy is if the restaurant owner and they're tending to you and waiting on you would just it would be almost insulting to leave anything. And we leave very little. And I would consider a 5 to 10% tip a really luscious tip in most restaurants. Now, last summer, I had relatives visiting who are from the United States, and their tendency is to tip minimum 20, like 30%. And I kept saying, in my view, please don't do that because you're giving an impression of, first of all, you're doing what's culturally not within the norm. And that gives an impression of Americans as having lots of money to throw around and we're all wealthy. And oh, well, then you would be also then a good target for theft, is something that passes through my head. Laura, I'm looking at your article, which is The Real Deal with Tipping in Italy. And you said, I think it's classy to leave a nice tip. And then, Eric, in your article, The Tipping Point, you say, let me get this out in the open. My default position when I eat out in Italy is not to tip. It isn't because I don't care, it's because I do. So we're looking at two very different points of view, and reality is somewhere in there. But Laura, let's start with you.
First of all, thank you, Wendy, for that lovely introduction. I appreciate that. And thank you for having me here today. What I want to put out there and clarify is that I'm not saying necessarily that, oh, you need to tip 20% or like even I didn't really put even any fixed amount in there. Europe in general is has different tipping customs. But my point is that the service industry waiters here in Italy are just totally underpaid. And I think that a lot of people don't realize that because so much of the discourse around tipping in a lot of publications, in guidebooks, etc., they repeat this line over and over again that in Italy, tipping is not necessary or not obligatory because the waiters are paid a living wage. And that's really what I take issue with. It's that statement. Oh, it's fine because they earn like the same salary as everyone else. And it's not true. For me personally, I have a hard time going out to a restaurant and leaving nothing. Tips really do make a difference in the quality of life.
I completely agree with Laura that wages for service staff are low. But as you said, Wendy, I think they're low for everybody. I think that bus drivers, cops, teachers, pharmacists, nurses, everybody, including restaurant staff that is not in the front of the house, cooks, dishwashers, and so on. And I don't see how tipping is really affect that, except for maybe affect the life of the wait staff. Italy needs to have a minimum wage. I think it's like trying to use a band-aid to fix a sinking ship. And besides, this is one of the worst parts about the United States to export, I think. This is a system that has its roots in slavery. This is a system that politicians always say they want to fix and that they don't fix. I think there are dozens of wonderful things about our home country that Italy could adopt. But I think that creating some sort of an obligation to tip, I think is the mistake. It's one of the things that I dislike about the US when I go back for a visit.
I think, as you said, yes, obviously it's different there, it's expected. And I never posited in my piece that it's expected here. I don't think that it's expected. But as you said, it is a gesture of generosity. And I think that it is appreciated by the waiters who are waiting on you if they do give you good service. And I I agree with you, Eric, that it is a system-wide problem. Wages are too low across the board here. Personally, I know that it's a drop in the bucket, but I feel better if I just leave them a little bit of a tip in cash. At least I know they're getting it, and sometimes on a card if that's all that I have. But
So, Laura, what is the little bit that you enjoy leaving,
I'm
percentage wise, let's say?
10%. I think that's fine. I think again
Thanks.
because they're expecting it, as you said. So even like 10%, I think they're happy with that. Again, unless like it's the case where you personally know the restaurant owner or the person waiting on you. In general, if you're just going out and having a nice meal, I don't think they're gonna be offended that you're leaving a nice tip. But again, it depends a little bit on the context because said out in the countryside may be different than if you're in
In the
rural
city, yeah.
in a big city at a more upscale place, for example.
But I know that you, Lori, you read Eric's article, and there it was a restaurant situation where people were out together, they had a great meal, and then the restaurant owner or whatever, the manager, had sort of a typical thing, and I'm sure you've experienced this, Lori, that they'll pull out the bottle of their homemade liqueur and they offer you that. There's a sense here of not like, okay, you're in sitting 1, sitting 2, eat, leave. Italians love their food and they love the service aspect of offering you this wonderful meal, even though you're paying for it. Now, in this case, the restaurant owner slash manager offered a wonderful bottle of wine to these people. And then in turn, that it sort of took away from my understanding from your article, Eric. It took away from that act of generosity that this person wanted to give to the group of people by leaving this outrageously exorbitant tip.
The tip was 50 euros on a 200 euro bill. So by US standards, that'd be 25%, nothing extraordinary. But in this case, the manager, who I knew because we both live in the same neighborhood, thought that he wanted us to have an unforgettable experience. And I think that it would have been more appreciated by him if everybody would have shaken hands with him and told him about what extraordinary meal it was, what extraordinary experience it was. Of course, he didn't mind having an extra 50 bucks in his pocket at the end of the night. But somebody who made a comment on the article said that in that case, or in a lot of cases that she specifically was aware of, it was sort of like offering to reimburse somebody for a gift that they gave you. You should just accept the gift graciously. But my worry is not that some waiters might end up with a bit more money. Obviously, in favor of that. I wish everybody could have a bit more money. But I think US culture is very transactional. You do this for me, and I do that for you. And one of the things that I find to be beautiful about Italy, and one of the reasons I've fallen in love with the country, is that I don't think it's transactional. There's a restaurant that I go to sometimes where they don't ask what time I'm go by. It's my table for the night. And if I show up at 7:30, I show up at 9:30, that's the table. And that's Eric's table. And I would find it to be a pity if that thing changed. And I know I'm talking a lot. I'll just make one more point. I've got certain red flags for restaurants, and there are a couple dozen restaurants in Rome I don't go to because they've tripped up a couple of these red flags. One of them, which I wrote about in my latest column, which is about wine, is if they try to switch wines on me, which is unethical, obviously. They give me a Montepulciano d'Abruzzo instead of a Vino Nobile da Montepulciano. Another one is if the waiter's out front and he's got a glossy menu and he's like, Amico, come on inside or whatever. But one of them is if they hand me the bill and then they say the tip's not included. And if I wanna leave a tip, I will, and more often than not, I leave something, not 20%, but I'll round up at the very least. But I would hate it if Italy became as transactional as the United States has become and is increasingly becoming.
What do you think, Laura, on that? I would hate to have that start to happen in Italy. I like the feel that you give something and you want that the waiter or the waitress to feel, "Oh, this person's so kind. I did my best," and it's sort of this reciprocal thing. And I do agree with both of you that, who knows where if even when there is like a line to put the tip on when you make your payment, who knows whether it ever goes to the wait staff. So it's better probably just to give it to them in cash so that the person who did an amazing job gets that money themselves.
As Eric mentioned, there are restaurants that will take advantage of tourists, and but those are places that I would never send my readers, for example, and would tell you to avoid and would avoid myself. But when you do go to a place that's genuinely good and the servers care, for me, it's nice to, as you said, have an interaction with the person that is serving you, whether that happens to be the owner of the restaurant, and sometimes it is if it's a really small family-run place, which is lovely, or if it's just someone who happens to be working there. There is a culture of service and hospitality in Italy.
One of my Italian uncles, who's has since passed away, his entire life, he was a waiter. I don't believe he was trained, but he took so much pride in it, and it wasn't just a passing thing. It was something he loved and was thrilled to be able to bring these beautiful dishes to the table. So there is that whole different way that waiters feel about themselves and the way Italians feel about them. They're very esteemed and valued everywhere.
I agree that it's a much more generally respected profession in Italy. I think it ought to be everywhere. I worked in the restaurant business for several years. Before I went into journalism, I went to cooking school and worked in the kitchen and as a waiter and as a wine steward. And I have a tremendous respect for people, whether like Laura's husband, who are formally trained, or people like your late uncle, Wendy, who just did it with a great passion. I think this is one of the great things about Italy. And one of the reasons that this topic that is so important to me is because I think it's a reflection of the culture. And I think that well-intentioned visitors, like the people you mentioned, Wendy, who are in the business of California and like to leave a 30% tip, unintentionally, they're damaging a system that they've flown halfway across the world to be part of. Or that people who read what Laura writes are spending thousands and thousands of dollars to buy tickets and spend hotels and go to meals. And inadvertently, they're chipping away at this culture. And it's true that it's resilient and that it's lasted for generations and things like that. But cultures change very slowly and then all at once. And I don't want to be in my twilight years living in Italy and find myself in a US restaurant culture where quality matters less. The pride of the restaurant owner and server matters less. That people are trying that they come and give you the bill before you ask for it. They point out that you need to leave a tip, that it's pre-programmed in the thing. All that I think is very distasteful for me in the US. And I really hope with all my soul that it does not arrive here. And so that's why I wrote what I wrote. And that's why I'm saying the things I'm saying.
So, for anybody who might be tuning in and listening and hoping to understand better, well, like, what should I do? I think we would probably agree that when you come to Italy, it's probably not the best idea to do something that's glaringly out of sync with the culture, like 20 and 30% tips as your general way of approaching a restaurant tip.
Again, like my husband and his colleagues are not expecting tips, but it is appreciated. And if you round up the bill, if you want to leave 10%, I think 10%.
If some restaurants start to realize that, oh, these Americans will leave a 20 or 30% tip, then they'll start catering more and more to those people. They'll start to look for the one off customer rather than the repeat customer and things like that. That's probably far down the road. And I may be extrapolating out too far based on a simple couple of articles that Laura and I wrote. But I think that we need to sort of reinforce this part of the culture that values service, takes pride in what they do, and so on. And again, I'm not opposed to rounding up. I'm not opposed to handing the waiter a folded up banknote on my way out and saying thank you. It was wonderful. But I would really hate for this to change.
I hear you, Eric. Obviously, I know that wages are too low all across the board. And yes, cultures change slowly. And there are, for sure, there are going to be some places that will adapt.
Wendy, one thing that you said a little bit earlier was that, well, should we decide that a 10% tip is fine? I would say no. I would say that for average service, it should just be don't wait for your change or wait for your change if you will, or pay with a credit card and don't leave anything. And that when you start to get to extraordinary service, above average service, then that's where you would start to leave more. The average tip was about 10% in the US. When I first started restaurants as a college student, it was expected to be 15%. Once you establish that you're expected to leave something, whatever the number is, it's a slippery slope. Then it becomes 15%, then it becomes 20, now it's 25. Last time I was in the US, they gave suggested tips when I paid with a credit card and they said, "Do you want to leave 20, 25, 30, or 35% were the options I was given. And I think the average now is, I don't think it's 25%, but it's getting close to that. So if we were to say, yeah, okay, let's everybody agree, as if we all three had the power to do that. But if we did, and if that's what we decided, it would still get to be 25% in 20 or 30 years or whatever. Once the idea is that the diner has to supplement the low wages that the restaurant owner pays, then we're off to the races.
I think that what I would not want to see happen is for it to become something that's obligatory and expected. Like, oh, what a cheapskate. They didn't leave me my like 20%. That's expected. I like the fact that, if you give a restaurant or a waiter 10% in Italy, they're happy. And there is this, I want to show you some appreciation for the great service and food that you gave to me. It's something that makes both sides feel good.
Laura and I both said that we wouldn't want it to get to a point where it was obligatory, but I would like for it to stay at a point where it's a pleasant surprise.
So we're coming towards the end of our time. Another thing that's come through really from all three of us is if you want to show appreciation to wait staff, to give that tip in cash to the person, because you really don't know
Right.
if it will get to that person. If
I'm almost
it's
certain it won't. They
Yeah,
don't record who, yeah, almost certain if you add it to the bill, but thankfully, that's not an option in the vast, vast majority of places.
yeah. Laura, what other thoughts do you have before we close?
I think you've summed up all the arguments. That so I would just say I also hope it doesn't change drastically. I think that part of the is finding the places that still have that feeling of hospitality and whatnot. And so if you're visiting Italy, use your discretion. Ultimately, it's up to you if you want to leave something as a gesture of appreciation. And for sure, always a thank you or a handshake, whatever will be appreciated.
Yeah, yeah. These personal gestures really are still very much appreciated here. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks to both of you. Thanks, Wendy. Thanks, Laura.
Yeah,
Yes, thank
this was great. This was great. It's such an important topic and something people are very curious about. So we'll have to do it again.
Anytime.
This has been Flavor of Italy. Find us on www.flavorofitaly.com and on Substack, YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook, always as Flavor of Italy.